Here's what I think is the most important part actually to creating and sequencing a great yoga class. You can have planned out the most amazing, well thought out plan in the world, but you need to test it before you actually teach it. Testing is so crucial. You want to actually try out your flow before you teach it. Now, here's something that's important to distinguish. When I test out my yoga classes, I don't actually do a full 60-minute practice. Like, let's say I'm preparing to teach a full hour-long class at a studio. I've gone through my brain dump, I've written out my sequence, and this is what I think I want to teach. It's an hour-long flow. I don't actually take a full hour to do the class in its entirety. What I do is I mark it. So marking is a term from dance. Again, I have a dance background. So a lot of this, sequencing, planning, designing is stuff that I've learned from choreography and having to learn a lot of choreography and teach choreography and all of that stuff. So in dance, we call it marking. When you're kind of doing a sequence, like not fully, not all the way through. So it's like, if I've designed like a seated yoga class, and it's seated cat and cow, seated side bend, and seated twist, and it's 5 breaths per each pose, I wouldn't actually test it by doing the full thing and the full range of motion. I would mark it in the sense that I would go, really like an inside look at what it would be like. I would have my eyes closed and I'd be like, okay, cat and cow, going into our side bend, going into our twist, and then second side and into our twist. So I'm just kind of doing like 20% of the movements just to see if they actually flow together. So this is the big piece about testing. When you're marking and practicing your sequence ahead of teaching it, right away, you're going to see where you're missing poses, where you have too many poses, or where poses just don't make sense and don't flow well together. Sometimes what works on paper just doesn't actually work with our physical bodies. So testing it, marking it, it really doesn't have to take that long. Often as I'm sequencing and writing out my class, I'll be on my yoga mat and I'm kind of going through it at the same time, just so I can mark it and build it and make sure that what I'm writing down is actually logical, is safe, smart, and meaningful. In the beginning, earlier in a previous lesson, I said that I thought theming was a sign of respect for my students. It was a way for me to show them that I care, that I did put time, effort, and energy into this class, that I'm not just winging it and showing up unprepared. Testing is another key part of this. I don't want my students to be the guinea pigs for my class. I don't want to be throwing things at them and making them risking their bodies to see if my sequence is safe and makes sense. I want to already be super well prepared. I want the class to be well thought out before I actually teach it. Because again, you're dealing with people's bodies. I don't want to injure anyone. I want to make sure that what I've thought out is really safe and makes sense and works. That means I need to test it myself beforehand by marking it and by going through it. So testing is simple, but please do not neglect this step. It really is one of the best ways that you can elevate your classes. I think it's one of the reasons people maybe like my classes is because I've actually done them before I've taught them, so I can tell if they're good or not. So definitely don't underestimate testing. It's a super important part of this process.